Hey everyone, welcome to another Reasons and Resources, and in this episode we're going to be looking at reasons and resources for learning Erlang. Now the observant amongst you may realise that I did cover Erlang very early on in the series about a year ago, but I've decided to revisit it in some ways because it sort of fits in better with the Programming Polyglots website and sort of where we've been working through there. So that's why we're doing Elixir again. So, reasons to learn Erlang. Probably start off with my own, as I probably mentioned in the previous version of this, if you like, a year ago. My main reason for learning this initially was part of the 7 Languages in 7 Weeks book. And what actually happened, at the point I got to this language, I found it very difficult to grasp. So, things went off the rails a bit in terms of that. Was it Learn to Code, Code to Learn series, where I was working my way through the book, and I realised I needed to sort of regroup. And I've been regrouping ever since, as far as Erlang's concerned. But that was my main reason. It was just as that sort of process of going through that book, and it was one of the languages in 7 weeks. And then I just sort of kept picking away at it now and again, because I noticed it came up on various sort of end of year lists. I think it'd come up on the Stack Overflow survey several years on the trot, and we'll look at where it is currently in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, that for me that was it. And like I said, I keep revisiting this on and off. It's an interesting language, and there's several interconnected reasons why someone would want to learn this. And this is in no particular order, like always. So you've got concurrency and distribution. And you'll see on here, I'll include the Wikipedia articles, as always, and everything else in the description, so you can sort of work your way through all these resources. But yeah, concurrency and distribution's high up there. So Erlang was actually built from the ground up. Comes out of Ericsson. It's basically built to do with, or came out of that whole sort of telecommunications need, basically. So to do with working on telephony switches, and that's what the language was designed for. And it's interesting because the initial version of Erlang was implemented in Prolog, and in the course of working through that 7 languages in 7 weeks, you cover Prolog. And I must admit, when I got to learn Erlang, or attempt to learn Erlang, I did actually find it quite helpful, even though they're different paradigms. I did find it helpful actually learning Prolog. Anyway, back to concurrency and distribution. So it uses an actor model, so you've got these isolated processes that communicate via message passing. And so that makes it excellent for systems where you need high parallelism, and they're distributed across multiple machines. And it just sort of runs in its own little thing, if you like, which enables this communication of processes. And as you learn the language, you sort of get to see how that all hangs together. Now, tied together with all that is, and another reason for learning, is fault tolerance. So these systems are renowned for their ability to withstand failures. Processes are isolated, so if one fails, it doesn't bring the rest down. And there's this sort of let it crash philosophy, but they also have like supervisors in the mix. And so you can have these self-healing aspects of the language, and there's a robustness there which is all sort of shrink wrapped in, if you like. And the thing that I suppose you've got to get a little bit used to, the sort of jumping point for me was sort of changing your mindset into the fact that you've got you could potentially have hundreds of little small processes all running, all communicating with one another, or some of them in a certain order, and it's that, I suppose, change of perspective, which is also pretty challenging, but also one of the reasons why you might want to learn the language. So another reason that's interconnected to all this is scalability. So because it runs on the beam, what's called the beam. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but just the way it runs with these lightweight processes and efficient message passing in its own virtual machine, it means that it scales real nice. So it can handle like a large number of concurrent operations and users. Other things that are present, which contribute, if you like, but are in other systems, so they're not sort of peculiar to Erlang, it's a functional language, and also so within the language, once there's a functional language, and also once the variables are assigned a value, that value can't be changed, so it's immutable. And if you've ever worked with a language where there's strong immutability, you'll know that as an effect of that, it sort of prevents common programming errors related to where you might have shared states. And so, again, working with this language and the way it is and various other things, not just the concurrency and the fault tolerance and the scalability, but also functional programming and immutability, it does definitely sort of change your brain in some ways, and it makes you think differently about other paradigms and other ways of working, and things like pattern matching as well. And then you can see a list of other things which I haven't mentioned here. So you've got this concept of soft real time. We've already mentioned sort of high fault tolerance, so this high availability, non-stop. The other interesting thing is hot swapping, so you can actually change out code without stopping the system, and part of that I think is helped by these the fact that you've got all these little small processes, so you can take a process and you can tweak it and then swap it out, and you don't stop the whole system. So I'll include links into the deeper parts of the article on Wikipedia, and so you can go through and look at all these little let it crash code styling, whatever that means, or whatever that, however you might find that useful. And it's interesting actually when you see these components restart, and how you manage that, and obviously you need handling of errors, but it changes the way you approach that. And it was interesting for me actually, this came along at a really good time for me, where when I was learning programming way back, there was a lot of defensive programming involved, and a lot of it was what I call like front-end defensive programming. At that point, I couldn't even tell you if they existed, but going back to learning, early basic, I don't know if there was any try commands. I couldn't tell you. So, when I learned, it was really this thing where you were constantly checking what values were inputted and doing it from that point of view. Over time, I've shifted over gradually to various on various programming systems where you have these try statements, and then you catch the the error gracefully and then deal with it some way. So it's interesting to see how that's handled, how a failure in a system is actually handled in Erlang, and how Erlang does it. And so it's a cool part of the journey, I suppose, on really understanding the handling of errors in programming languages and the different ways you can do that, actually. So yeah, it was good from that perspective, actually. There's a little bit of code there, in case we haven't seen any already. I think there was somewhere. Let's have a look. There's some examples. Yeah, the other thing is the code, you end up with these interesting sort of structural patterns as well. And the other thing I seem to remember with this is I found it very helpful the way 7 Languages in 7 Weeks, the book, was organized, in the fact that it had gone from, I think I've got this right, it'd gone through, and as part of the process there were 2 that followed one another fairly closely, I think, which was Prologue, when was it into Scala, I think. And learning those 2 in that order, I found really helpful, even though it was a real struggle with Erlang, and I did have to sort of put that project to one side. I imagine if I tried to look at Erlang before looking at those languages, it probably would have completely put me off. So that's another thing. I don't think I've ever raised this explicitly. A lot of it's been implicitly, but it is quite interesting in if you are thinking about going down a sort of programming polyglot pathway, or just learning a succession of languages. It is quite useful. You don't have to, but it is quite useful, and might save you a lot of tearing your hair out, is to decide a pathway to go in terms of the order in which the languages you are going to learn, because you do find that learning certain languages before you learn other ones is certainly helpful, and it'll get you exposed to different ways of thinking and structuring your code slowly, rather than sort of diving in and at the deep end. So yeah. Anyway, I'll include the usual links here. Moving on, so still looking at reasons, I suppose. Let's have a look where it is on and again, I'm keeping with looking at the 2024 results, because they have still have the old survey here, which I like, the top paying one. Just good for seeing what sort of might be rising up. But if you look at most popular technologies, you can see Erlang is, where is it? Down here. So it's fairly low in that respect. It's actually below Elixir. Elixir is another programming language that runs on the Beam. If we look at admired and desired, where is it in the, and is there a chasm? Here we go. Admired 57.7, desired 1.9. And then just as a comparison, there's Elixir. Wow, that's pretty wide, isn't it? And yeah, so top paying, they're up the top. This is the thing, I think, it probably coincided around the time that I revisited the 7 Languages book, which is pretty old now, actually. But yeah, these had sort of bounced up to the top of this particular part of the Stack Overflow survey. So let's look at the more recent one as much as we can. So we'll just go in here. It's probably still pretty far down, I imagine. There's Gleaners, that's another language that runs on the beam. So, yeah, it's a nice set of three to learn, Erlang, Elixir, Gleam. There's Elixir, where's... Did I... Oh, there it is, yeah. So pretty low down here. And then Admired, Desired. Oh, the Admired's come down a little bit, hasn't it? I think. For Erlang, is there still quite a wide one? There's Gleam. And there's Elixir. Okay. So Gleam now has a wider between the Admired and Desired than the others. And it probably wasn't in, I don't think it would have been in last year's at all, actually. I could be wrong. So I'm trying to remember what the release number of Gleam was last year. Yeah, so when this went out, it probably wasn't very high up on most people's radar. Okay, so on to some resources. So as always, a reoccurring theme here, obviously that there's the main website, erlang.org. in there, and you can drill down through this. There's a ton of stuff in here. So we've got, getting started, we've got the documentation side of things, the books, all the usual stuff. Then we have this, which you can read online, which is Learning You Some Erlang for Great Good. It's a highly regarded online book. You should also find that within here, part of the getting started, you can drill down through here and find various learning materials as well. There's also books like this, the Programming Erlang, which is from the Pragmatic Bookshelf by Joe Armstrong, who, if you look on here, you can see designed by Joe Armstrong. The book I have in my programming language library is actually this one. So yeah, you can do. There's a number of books actually which you probably locate, which are written by people that are fairly high up within the Erlang community. So it's useful in that respect. FutureLearn have a functional programming in Erlang as well. University of Kent. It's not currently running, but that doesn't mean to say you should be able to. I wonder if you can still browse through this. Yeah. So sometimes with these, and it's worth sort of checking it out as well, see if it's still running. And there also may be materials out there that have been uploaded to YouTube, but I just wanted to flag this one up. So it's always worth checking out the MOOCs interfaces, things like FutureLearn, Coursera, those sort of websites. Just see if they've got a free to view or a free to audit, Erlang course. Yeah. There's Erlang the movie as well, if you want to check that out. Cheesy demonstration of the Erlang programming language. It's from way back. Yep. So you may recognize this as one of the authors of one of the books that I've mentioned previously in this video. An evening at Erlang Factory with Joe Armstrong, Mike Williams and Robert Verding. Yeah. Over a century of programming. Erlang Solutions. It was 12 years ago. Some of these are quite old, but they're interesting from a historical perspective. And then you've got Erlang Solutions YouTube channel. You can find more up-to-date stuff. And there's an interesting conference talk about the soul of Erlang and Elixir. Go to 2019, so a good few years ago, but that's a pretty interesting presentation. So sort of connections between the two. There is an Erlang track on exorcism. With the usual suspects. You know, like Hello World, Tufa, RNA transcription. I think if you've ever done these, you know what sort of things turn up. And on Programming Polyglots, there we go. There is an entry for Erlang. So it goes through on this, each section of this that's been done, it always goes through the same things, but for different languages. So you've got just some key features, binding and scope, how that works in the language, functions and closures, frames and argument passing, which are interrelated, prototype and classes, what that might look like. So it's handy because it sort of gives you common features of languages and says, okay, how does this get expressed in the language? Extension, how that works. Dispatch, and there's various ways you can sort of dispatch functions in various languages and how that manifests itself. Operators, what they look like when they're sort of placed within the syntax. Control flow, what that looks like. And you can see there's an interesting, I'm going through this pretty fast, but there's some interesting structural arrangements here. Matching, pattern matching, very powerful in this language. There's the whole, obviously I don't normally touch on the ins and outs of the languages when I do these videos, but yeah, it's got the whole head-tail business is an interesting rabbit hole in itself to go down in languages. And I think Prolog's got a similar thing actually. Type systems, type inference, immutability, persistent structures, processes and threads, obviously that's pretty important. Messaging, very important. Synchronization, how they all the sort of that process, how the processes manage to keep in sync. Pointers and garbage collection, whether in a language it's sort of built in, or whether you've got to sort of do it as automatic garbage collection, or whether it's manual. And other things like, in certain languages, I wouldn't say the terms are meaningless, but so you have to sort of understand that certain languages, the concepts of pointers and garbage collection could be handled quite differently in different languages, not surprisingly. Metaprogramming. Oh, and there's a reference to the original Erlang programming thing. So I didn't watch it at all before I did this. So it'd be interesting retrospectively to see how different or not this is a year on. Anyway, there we have it. Thanks once again for checking in and checking out this Reasons and Resources episode. And I will catch you in the next one. Bye for now.